The competition was so fierce in the music industry in the 1960s that many excellent groups remained obscure up until more recently. And one of these groups was the Free Design, one of the finest vocal groups of the era. And we're going to unpack their catalog here on Pop Goes the 60s.
That's all people, no more from prospect and info. Your mind, but not completely, make the madness stop. Bubbles in the dreams of love.
See my kite, it's fun. See my kite, it's green and white.
Peter, Paul, and Mary walked upon the sea. I found love in the spring.
If you are new to the Free Design, I would classify them as a 60s sunshine pop group with a jazz vocal approach. And that combination oftentimes gets them put into this pop psych category, which I would say is pretty accurate. Now, this group put tons of attention and effort into their vocals and into their overall recording production. And unfortunately, because chart success eluded them, they remained relatively unknown in spite of releasing 7 albums. Hailing from Delavan, New York, the Dedrick siblings, Sandy, Bruce, and Chris, came from a musical family. Their father, Art, had been a jazz guy who had done arrangements for the likes of Vaughn Monroe and other big bands. And their mother was also a musician, and she ran the church choir. Now, being born into a musical family, the kids were always given instruments to play and were encouraged, and this became one of the things they did naturally. Now, by 1966, Sandy, Bruce, and Chris moved to New York City, and they got involved a little bit in the folk scene. And it was Bruce that encouraged them to form a group. And because there were 2 guys and a girl, they were very capably able to do Peter, Paul, and Mary songs. So they started playing in Greenwich Village in coffee houses like the Bitter End, and they went by the name of the Village Fair. As they honed their chops on the coffee house circuit in Greenwich Village, they continued to improve. Chris started to write music, and with the connections of their father, Art, they were able to record a kind of a very nice demo. And Sandy's husband, Joe, started hawking that around, and that's how they got noticed. Now, thanks to their father's input on recording the demo, it sounded so good that they've got offers from several record companies just weeks after recording it. One was RCA Victor, and another was Project 3. That was a smaller label run by Enoch Light. And their father steered them toward Project 3 for reasons of, I think, more integrity and better support of the artists as opposed to a regular pop label. So they were going by the Village Fair as their name at that time, having been playing in the Village, and they decided on a name change, and they came up with the Free Design. With a record contract in hand, they began to work on their first album, so they went home to start rehearsing new material. Now, Chris had been a student at the Manhattan School of Music. He was majoring there. So let's introduce you to the band a bit here. So we're going to start with Bruce Dedrick, vocals, guitar, bass, trombone. Sandy, vocals, keyboard, saxophone. And Chris Dedrick, who did most of the writing, he was vocals, guitar, 12-string, piano, trumpet, and recorder. So they came to writing this album with a lot of experience playing instruments, but really it was all in the arrangement of the voices. That was really where they shined. So when they came to the studio to record, a lot of these pieces were already worked out. One name you're going to recognize is Phil Ramone. He had done some engineering for Peter, Paul, and Mary, and he was on hand here to engineer these first recordings by the Free Design. This was produced by Enoch Light, and the group came with 9 originals, and the first was called Kites Are Fun.
Kites are fun.
See my kite, it's fun. See my kite, it's green and white.
Released in early 1967, Kites Are Fun only hit number 114 on the Bubbly Under chart, and it hit number 33 on the Easy Listening chart, and got all the way up to number 3 in Buffalo, which was near their hometown of Delavan. Unfortunately, it didn't get into the top 100, but despite having a little bit of a hit, they started to get some invitations to television shows, and being somewhat of a family group, I think that always worked well on television. They played Carson. Art Dedrick, their father, had known Doc Severinsen, so that may have been the lifeline to the Carson show, so they did that. Now, because they got several television appearances right off the bat, they didn't tour right away. But here are some of the other great songs off this record.
street in the rain, my umbrella up at my head.
The proper ornaments of life. Stars, of great vacation.
I had mentioned earlier that Chris Dedrick was the main writer of the group, but the song Umbrellas was written by Bruce. Now, one of the things that you can tell by these songs, I mean, there's certainly a sophisticated sound. The vocal arrangements are really top-notch. They're produced well. And one of their heavier songs that is my favorite is called Make the Madness Stop.
Whoa, 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 your mind but not completely. Make the madness stop.
Now, a lot of people are quick to classify this group as a sunshine pop band, but if you actually listen to the lyrics of some of these songs, particularly Make the Madness Stop, it tells a different story. Check this out. Let me quote here. Walk the way of love, eyes open, fly the skies above, with hope and heart and sense, blow your mind but not completely, make the madness stop. So this is not the Archies with good vocals. This is a band that with very insightful and introspective lyrics.
Sugar pops, I'll hug you and kiss you and love you.
Now this group, in many ways, the production anyway, seemed on par with the Beatles or some of the Beach Boys' work. And the reason for that is because they were at the very special label Project 3. And Enoch Light, I'll talk more about him in a moment, but it took a very special record company to give this kind of attention to this kind of talent, and that's why the sound's so good. Now, I mentioned this album has 9 originals. They also have a few covers, like Michelle by the Beatles, 59th Street Bridge Song, and A Man and a Woman. Now, to support the new album, the band did go out and play live, and they had a couple friends join them so they could have a full band when playing live. Bob Papaleone on drums, Tom Sesniak, keyboard and bass, amongst other people helping them out. Due to the distribution issues, this very good album, Kites Are Fun, did not chart. So none of the group's albums ever charted, and I think that has a lot to do with the distribution, because they had some television appearances, they were playing live, so a lot of other lesser bands were able to at least get on the top 200 of Billboard's album sales. And they unfortunately were not. So let me talk a little bit about Enoch Light's Project 3 label. So this album that you see here, let me just open it up here. Project 3 typically always had a gatefold album. They almost pioneered the gatefold. And all of these free design albums have this lush gatefold with a glossy cover. Typically there's plenty of information on the inside, liner notes. The art department's very good. And they don't really spare too much expense. Now, the reason why Project 3 stood out and is different, and the reason why maybe their father was pushing them toward this label, is Enoch Light, he was a pioneer in audio recording. And one of the things Project 3 did is, instead of recording to magnetic tape, it was recorded onto magnetic film, which got rid of a lot of the flutter. It was just a far better quality. And they used, instead of like rubber wheels to advance the tape, they were sprocketed wheels. So there's these different advancements that was more for audiophiles. And you would play this kind of Project 3 stuff on better equipment. So you have a group here that really took full advantage of the technology that Project 3 had to offer. While on the road, they played with the likes of Sonny and Cher, Roy Orbison, and even Duke Ellington. And oftentimes they did concerts with just the group, and they had an orchestra hired to play with them. So they really had some really good connections through their father, and they were able to outfit some of these live shows with full orchestration. Now, they did play shows, like I mentioned, Cavett. They played, Pat Boone had a show that they played on. They were on Mike Douglas's show over a dozen times. And one of the things that I think I'll mention about the free design, as I keep talking about how good their vocals are recorded, they are right in line with other fantastic vocal groups of the 60s, like the Beach Boys, the Association, and Spanky and Our Gang, the Mamas and the Papas. I would say those are four of the best. I would put the free design in there with them, no problem at all. Now they do have one thing in common. They were all disciples of the group the Hi-Los. So the Hi-Los were a 50s vocal group that the groups I just mentioned emulated and really were huge influences on them, particularly Brian Wilson, John Phillips, guys in the Association. In fact, Clark Burroughs, who was in the Hi-Los, was the vocal arranger for the Association. So we see this very astute attention to laying the vocals down. And in the United States, you could get better vocals recorded because typically these were done on 8-track tape machines. Whereas in England, the Beatles only had 4 tracks to deal with, so they couldn't do the lush vocals that the Beach Boys did. And that's what really sets the two countries apart as far as recording technique goes. Now, Chris Dedrick had an amazing flair for writing and arranging, and as I mentioned earlier, they just practiced and rehearsed and got these vocals down, so when they did come to the studio, a lot of that stuff was already done. So the other members of the group also contributed ideas, but Chris was the main writer. So the group started working on their second album, You Could Be Born Again. Now, Chris Dedrick, I mentioned Brian Wilson earlier in terms of the Hi-Los, he was becoming like a type of a Brian Wilson type where he could kind of hear the arrangements in his head and was really great at writing charts. So this album continued in that vein, and they added a fourth member. They added younger sister Ellen Dedrick. She basically sang she also could play trumpet, and she had waited to finish high school before they asked her to join the band. So they had another voice to work with.
I'll show you how you could be born again now. I found love in the fall, and it did not hurt at all.
Those two songs were released as singles, and I Found Love seemingly should have been a hit, but did not grace the charts, unfortunately. And the album, though, has a high level of very sophisticated songs that really aren't meant for the pop charts.
Windy day, windy day.
The jazzy arrangements, sound collages, and tape manipulation really takes them outside of that pop vein, but somehow all this music is still very accessible, yet it stands apart from their contemporaries.
Daniel Dolphin was a real friend. He knew more than he said. Smart.
This album looks sharp cover design, good photography. Again, we got the gatefold, some handwritten stuff in the center here, plenty of background, color photo on the back. You can see that gloss there. And this album, they had 5 covers on it, so maybe they were a little bit out of new material, having exhausted a lot of it on the first album. But the best cover is I Like the Sunrise by Duke Ellington.
I like the sunrise. I like the sunrise, blazing in the new sky.
There are plenty of serious topics on this album, particularly in the song An Elegy, which was sung about their cousin who was killed in the Vietnam War, their cousin Dwight, who was nicknamed Pete Dedrick, and that was sung by Ellen.
For the last time, it wasn't so easy. Words were hard.
This album sounds just as good as the first album. Again, Phil Ramone is here doing the engineering, and they started to rub elbows a little bit with some of the bigger hotshots in the industry, especially in the New York area. Sandy intended the photo shoot for the Frank Zappa and the Mothers album. We're only in it for the money. Unfortunately, as good as this album was, it didn't chart. None of the singles charted. And they resorted to trying out in late 1968 a Christmas single.
Bring your mind and body back from the store. Get to know the people in your house. You might like them. Christmas is a day when you can't stop the
Project 3 being a middle-of-the-road label, that continued to plague the band as far as chart success, and these two Christmas songs did not chart even on the holiday chart. So that was a shame. But by early 1969, the group members, particularly Chris and Bruce, they started to do some background singing on other Project 3 releases, and Bruce produced a single for a group called The Sermon, where the Free Design provided backing vocals.
Never, never, never gonna find her, let her down, never love. 'Cause there's only one for you.
Now, this is the third album, Heaven and Earth, and we see 4 members on here, but there was a 5th member. Their sister Stephanie started to sing with them a little bit, though doesn't appear on the photo of the album. This album, again, we've got the nice gatefold, great photography, nice liner notes, very well done, very durable. So these are originals if you can find them. I mean, they've lasted a long time because of this nice hard glossy cover. So this album was every bit as good as the preceding album, and they were really trying, I think, to get a hit song.
You be you and I'll be me, close but independently, not one but two inseparably. Now's the time for love indeed. Now. It's the time now for love and me, baby. It's
Those 3 songs were promo singles. I'm not sure if they were actually released as a full-fledged single, but Dorian Benediction, that last song, I think maybe a little too daring for the pop charts anyway, although that's I think one of the best songs they had done. So they were clearly showcasing what they could do, and hoping, I suppose, that the singles market would just latch onto it. Unfortunately, they didn't. Now, by this time, they're probably getting a little bit tired of not having hits, and they came up with this self-deprecating song, which was also released as a single.
You're gonna make it pay for us. Hello, hit, hit, sure to be a hit, hit, hit.
Of course, that song didn't chart, so I guess this group was really an album-oriented band now, I guess, since they weren't having any chart success at all, which is obvious from these 3 tracks.
Save my love through loneliness. Save my love for sorrow.
Where Do I Go is from the musical Hair, and If I Were a Carpenter is one of the better covers. Now, one of the things they were doing at this time when they were touring, much like the Association, some of these groups who came out of kind of the folk circles in the early days and had this great rapport with the audiences, they did universities, and oftentimes they were able to add the university choir or an orchestra to augment their sound. Now, as I mentioned, Bruce had produced that one single. Here's another Project 3 artist called Tony Mottola. He was a guitarist, and they did arrangements on this album and sang on it as well. Yeah, this album might be cheaper to pick up than the other Free Design albums, so it's probably worth getting if you can get a deal on it. Again, you've got the gatefolds, the nice packaging here. So that's Tony Mottola, and he was a guitarist who did several albums on that label. Here's another one that's even a little more interesting. Enoch Light presents Spaced Out. So this is like a Moog synthesizer kind of psychedelic album that focuses on really the Beatles and Burt Bacharach, Hal David songs. Yeah, kind of a revolutionary use of the synthesizer there. And just to give you a look here, they do some interesting songs. They actually do Obla Di Obla Da, Get Back, Norwegian Wood, to name a few, Eleanor Rigby. So this was one of the other projects they were working on. They also did some commercials for Chapstick.
The day you were born, your lips started doing nice things for you, and kept on.
By 1970, they were already working on their 4th album, Star Time Bubbles Love, And this album is, I would say, a slight step up yet from the other two albums. They continue to push some boundaries here, and it's evident on these songs here.
Looks better standing on my head. That's the natural look. Have a happy rebirth. Be a yogi. Starlight looking you and me in a cloud of milk in a marble sea.
No reason for dust, baby. Better get on off of your friend. Yours in peace, I'd like to be.
And we see them taking more chances with some of these offbeat songs, but where they really stand out is with the fun and exhilarating song Bubbles.
Bubbles keep my dreams apart. Bubblegum kinda keeps my heart from getting heavy and cry.
Now with this song, it's as if they're saying, hey, you want to see how good we really are? They're just messing with us at this point, you know, with this fast-paced vocals and this clavichord intro. It's a little funky, and they're really showing us what they can do. And this is I think one of their signature songs and one of their best recordings. This album has some very fine covers on it. I would say the covers on this album outpace the covers on the previous three albums, and here they are.
How's your bird and where's your monkey do?
What you at, where you into?
Clap your feet.
Tomorrow is the first of the rest of my life. Time and love, everybody. Time and love. Give me time and love. Nothing cures like time and love. Why aren't we? Butterflies are free.
Time and Love was by Laura Nyro, and the song Butterflies Are Free was written by Stephen Schwartz for the play of the same name, which was adapted in 1972 into a film starring Goldie Hawn. Now this album marks a high watermark for the group as they push their talents to the breaking point. That's All People is one of their most powerful songs, and to my ears it seems almost like, you know, like the Beatles did The End at the end of Abbey Road. This is kind of their The End. The Beatles didn't know they were breaking up then, and the Free Design wasn't breaking it up now either, but I always contend that, you know, it's hard for these 60s groups to cross into the 70s and be more successful. Very few do it. Usually it's the end of the road. So I see this as potentially a good stopping point for the group, but they continued on with a second album in 1970. This is the second release of 1970 called The Free Design, Sing for Very Important People. This is basically an album much like Peter Paul and Mary's album called Peter Paul and Mommy, which was for children. That was released in 1969. And this album, I think they probably chose to go this direction after the strides they made in the prior album left them no place to go, really. But they also all were starting to have children, so it made some sense for them to start doing something more for their kids, maybe, in mind more so than the fans, which yielded this album. In fact, the drawing was done by a grade schooler. Great cover. But I would say that this is an album where they started to lose their mojo a little bit. As I mentioned, it seems like they're doing this album more for themselves than for the fans. And I think that having done 4 outstanding albums for the fans, it didn't really yield them much fame or fortune. They decided to maybe do something more for themselves, which is this record. Now, I don't care for this record as much. There are a few songs that were already released. Bubbles is also on this album, which had been released just 5 or 6 months before. So this has got a bit of a compilation feel to it. And some of the newer tracks I don't feel are as strong.
Give a little time for the child within you. Don't be afraid to be young and free. Onto the locks and
Roping donkeys one by one with their 6 colored old children. Go to sleep.
get to Sesame Street. How to get to Sesame Street. How to get to Sesame Street.
Interestingly, they do a cover of the Sesame Street theme song here that had only been around for about 8 or 10 months. And they're covering some ground they already covered as well. And they were still releasing singles as well.
Why do we cry? sure is a riddle.
Let's find a scarlet tree with a golden bough. Where the
Not surprisingly, with the material on this album, they appeared on the Captain Kangaroo show. Unfortunately, they didn't make it onto Sesame Street. That would have maybe got them some really good publicity. But there was already some cracks in the band that had been starting to form after the last album, and that has to do with brother Bruce, who I think would have preferred to record more of his material on these albums. Chris Dedrick was such a fine composer and arranger that he just kind of took over. And we see this in a lot of family bands. We saw this in CCR with the Fogerty brothers. You know, you get these family dynamics that play into this, and it doesn't always work out perfectly. It works out for a while, but Bruce decided to go out on his own after this album, and they became a trio again. The next album, which is called One by One, this album, I'm going to start out by talking about a cover song, probably the most zonked out song they ever recorded, and it's a cover of The Doors' Light My Fire.
say to you, girl, it couldn't get much higher.
Now, I put that cover of Light My Fire up against Jose Feliciano's Any Day, and it just goes to show you how a great song could be covered in many different ways. Now, this album has a little bit, I would say, thinner material, but there's still some quality songs here.
Like to sing about good times, like to sing about pain, like to run to go round, run to go upside down. We help each other carry weight, the storm it went away.
So that last song, Friends, Thank You All, is another kind of a goodbye of sorts. This was their last album on the Project 3 label. And I think at this point, they may have been saying, well, we know we're doing really fine work here. We really feel that we could use some recognition. I mean, I would think that. So they changed labels and moved over to a new label called Ambrotype and recorded their next album, There Is a Song. Now, I can't show you this album. I don't have this one in my collection, but for this album, they moved to Canada. And I think with this album, there's a little bit of a return, and there's more return to the old sound, and there's more urgency in these songs.
You can look beyond the dream you dream into another way of seeing. You can see beyond the thoughts you think into.
There is a light tonight, it draws the wind, like moths we know the fire, we dance and sing.
Love does not die. No. Love does not die.
These songs show somewhat of a return to form, and I think it's really capped off by an excellent tribute to Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Peter, Paul, and Mary answer in the wind. Ring the bell of glory. He's here again, here again. Here.
Now, the Ambrotype label was apparently new, so I don't know how it could do better than Project 3, but of course, this album did not chart, and they ended up packing it in and calling it a day. Eventually, they formed a new group called the Starscape Singers. Younger sister Stephanie was also a founding member of that group, and that was based out of Canada. It was more of a choral group with Chris Dedrick as the main composer. You know, it really is amazing that some of these 60s groups had as many albums as they did. Back in those days, record labels, I mean, obviously they wanted hits, but they also realized that they could nurture a group and try to get the most out of them that they could. In this case, 7 albums by a band that really is relatively unknown in 60 circles is quite amazing. And the reason I think they had a label that really believed in them, and they had the proper backing and proper support, and that yielded some wonderful material. Now, this group didn't really get much notice until the 90s or the early 2000s, and they influenced a later generation. And here's a list of groups that they influenced: Stereolab, Bell and Sebastian, Cornelius, Pizzicato 5, Beck, the High Llamas. There was a little bit of a resurgence, and the Free Design did a reunion album in 2001 called Cosmic Peekaboo. Now, this resurgence also included appearances of their songs in films such as Stranger Than Fiction, Werewolves Within, commercials such as Toyota, Delta Airlines, and Zillow, and TV shows like The Gilmore Girls, Weeds, and the Powerpuff Girls. Now, thankfully, much of their catalog is being reissued on the label called Light in the Attic, and several compilations have come out. One was called Kites Are Fun, the best of Free Design. That was in 1998. And the very best of was 2001. Those are both excellent compilations. You could, if you want a starting point, that would be a good place to start. And then Butterflies Are Free, a 2020 complete recordings 4-disc collection, which is also very good. You can find it all on CD, much of it on vinyl. So their stuff is available, even Apple Music has got it. So you'll find it all over the place if you want to dip your toe in or buy the whole 4-disc set. So that's my video on the Free Design. This is one that I've wanted to do for a very long time. One of the groups I still listen to a lot, and for some reason their music still hits me, and it's the sophistication and the beauty of it really keeps me listening. I keep hearing new things within it. As always, I'm looking to continue to grow my channel, so if you check out popgoes60s.com, I've got some great merchandise there. I have a tip jar below if you want to just make a one-time donation, and I also have a Patreon subscription for those of you who like to give a little more regularly and help support this program in a bigger way. All of you, I appreciate all the support, and I will be back very soon with another video here on Pop Goes the 60s.